What's good, everybody? I'm Jędrek. He's Sodek. And today we have a special double treat tier list episode for you, both for February and March of 2022. Let's go. Alrighty. So, as you all know by now, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty dropped 2 weeks ago on Modo, or a week and a half ago on Modo, and technically you could only play it in paper since last Friday, I think. But nobody really cares that much about like legality of paper cards that much these days, because most of the tournaments are played on Modo. Even though there were some paper tournaments like SCGCon, and I think SCGCon was the same weekend as the pre-release of Kamigawa. So
yeah.
And then this weekend we had NRG in I want to say Milwaukee, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, and like going forward, there will be like a Polish tournament called Paprikash. There's some
Next
also a
weekend, or
Actually, this weekend.
And in 2 days probably when you see this, because we are recording as always on Tuesday, and you will see it on Thursday or on Friday. I don't know yet.
What?
Probably Thursday, because I'm leaving Friday morning.
Okay, so that's likely. And there will be also a tournament in Paris at the beginning of March, and like paper tournaments are slowly returning, at least in Europe and US.
Yeah, there was an Action tournament like 2 weeks ago as well, or 2.5 weeks ago.
Yeah, so if you don't have your cards, maybe it's the last time to buy them. Maybe not the last, like a good moment.
It's a good time to buy them, definitely.
Yeah. It's a good one.
Okay, so what did change with Kamigawa in Modern? What's your first thing that comes to your mind when you hear Kamigawa in Modern? What do you think about?
The first thing is that finally something changed, because I was a bit bored with the previous Modern that hasn't changed that much in a half a year. And finally we have some movements, we have some new archetypes enabled by new cards. Are they really good? Not that much, but at least it's something fresh to play. There are a few cards that made a huge impact, maybe not huge, a big impact on the format. And the first and probably most important is the cycle of legendary lands, and the most important one is Boseju, who endures. At the very first moment when it got spoiled, people were shockingly screaming about how extremely powerful it is, including myself.
People? I think it was just you.
No, okay. Also others,
I guess
players were.
People were like, yeah, this will completely change an eternal format, yada yada.
And it's changed, at least Modern a bit, but not to the point when the format is completely new. For instance, there are decks that are using 3 to 4 copies. For instance, Amulet for color are using it. There are also 2 color decks that can afford to play 1 or 2 copies. For example, we saw green-white Heliod decks playing 1, or Yawgmoth, or any other deck. If you can play spell lands, you should do that, because your flats are not that problematic.
Especially those one, because they're basically as free as your utility land can get.
Because it's not entered the battlefield tapped at some point or whatever.
They're always untapped, never cost you any life, and the only downside is that they are legendary and I guess unfetchable. But legendary downside is mitigated by playing small amount of them, and the not being able to fetch them downside is usually mitigated by, you're playing 2 colors, so you have a bunch of basics and shocklands anyways to fetch. It's not 3 or 4 color mana bases when you have 1 of each basics, 1 of each shocklands, and you can't really cut into this pool. and you can't really cut into the pool of fetch lands because then your color requirements don't always meet, because fetch land is like rainbow lands basically, if your mana base is constructed well. So yeah, you love to see those legendary lands. Boseiju, the biggest one. I would argue that the second one is definitely Otawara.
Yeah.
You
I
see
like
Otawara in like Living End in Rhinos defeating those Teferis that were very problematic before. You see Otawara in like some Murktide lists had one Otawara. Blue White had one Otawara. It's a from what I've played with the card, it's like it's never screwed me really, because well, it's an untapped land that you can always play and get mana. If blue mana is good for you, then this land will be at least okay. And I've already had some situations like my opponent plays Murktide and they Blood Moon me and I don't have counterspell at the ready, but I have Island in play and I have Otawara in hand. So I just waited a couple of turns and they just were passing with 2 islands open all the time to counter my explosives or whatever to deal with Blood Moon. And the OTA just went Otawara and they're like, what the fuck is happening? It's uncounterable, it's instant speed, it's everything. And then I just go like Inquisition, discard your Blood Moon and whatever. So
easy.
yeah.
Like for me, the best Otawara moment was when opponent, like I was playing versus Belcher when I was on Living End. Opponent went turn 4. I had a slow start. They went turn 4 Ritual into Belcher, and it looked like a Veil of Summer up. Okay, let's play this. Like I had a situation if I want to Force of Vigor and maybe lose to Pact of Negation plus Veil of Summer. Then I just went to Otawara and attacked with my shitty creatures for the win.
I think one of the best feelings about with Otawara is when you're playing against Burn, your opponent plays Eidolon and you're at 2 life and they're like, you can't do anything, and then you just channel Otawara, bounce their Eidolon, and
I can actually.
So,
Or when I was playing Living End, it was like I'm playing land, and like I started with 1 copy. Now I'm playing 2. I probably won't play 3 because it's after all it's a legendary land, but very often I could go for turn 3 Living End just to return like 2 free creatures, and then Otawara was hard removal because of the tempo I got earlier. So kind of free in many decks, and
the effect is reasonably powerful, I would say.
Yeah, it's really good. Like although like if you don't have legendary creatures, 4 mana for bounce is a lot, but
yeah,
like,
but it's still
it
like
prevents you flooding.
Yeah, it's such a free effect because it's a land, and also it occupies the space for me as a player who plays a lot of blue decks that Cryptic Command occupied before, and you can't afford to do that anymore because Cryptic Command costs 4 mana, which is a lot. Which is you can always bounce a problematic permanent, which is something that you always want to do. Like you want to have this option of bouncing, like Rest in Peace, or your opponent's Planeswalker, or I don't know, Shrine of Burning Rage, whatever the fuck your opponent is playing. But you can't justify playing a 4 mana instant with a pretty hard cost as well, just to have this luxury of bouncing. And now you can just play Otawara, which is 4 mana, instant speed, uncounterable, and you can do that. And if you don't need to do that, because most of the time you won't need to bounce this very specific type of card, you can just play it and get mana, and it's untapped, and it's painless, and it's just great. But yeah, those lands are really good, and I think definitely Boseiju is the most impactful one, and you can see how it changed some sideboard approaches. Like people started to play much more Magus of the Moon instead of Blood Moon and like Murktide in sideboards, because Amulet can just blow up their Blood Moons now.
Yeah, and I also saw the uptick of, for example, Boseiju in Amulet, because it's a tutorable form of interaction. Even not versus Blood Moon, because like it's
it's great against Hammer. Out of this deck.
It's just a really good versus Hammer, really good versus Belcher. Like earlier, Belcher versus Amulet matchup was very favored for Belcher. Now I believe it still is, but it's much closer because Belcher doesn't play Blood Moon because like it's not worth to play Blood Moon anymore in most circumstances. Plus, Primeval Titan can just tutor for Karuland plus Boseju and destroy your Belcher situation. So it's much harder to
and I would say that Amulet was the poster child basically for us, for a deck that can't really win against Hammer that consistently before, because Titan was a deck that was also always light on interaction, and it's just a tad bit slower than Belcher, than Belcher as well, but than Hammer. But now, if you have this situation that's pretty common, which is you get Titan and Amulet, and you don't have Dryad, so you can't start machine gun their stuff with Valakut, and you don't have 2 Amulets, so you can't kill them, and you beforehand you would be just turn too slow, but now you can go Titan, find like Haste Land, attack, find Boseju with Karuland, untap, bring back Boseju, and you have a Naturalize to just kill something. And next turn, if you attack again, you have another Boseju, so you have second Naturalize, just kill something. So basically, if you're playing like 3 or 4 Bosejus in the main deck, which some people does, you are getting Naturalize on every attack with Titan, which is like super great.
It's good. And there are also other lands, because like we talked about Boseju Tawara.
I was very impressed by Sokenzan. Honestly.
Sokenzan, it's really good. Like it's a build your own Lingering Souls with Ren.
Yeah, it's Lingering Souls that's actually good in 2022.
Yeah, because once again, if they are bad as an effect, you can play it as a land, and it's really good. Takenuma, I didn't see that many Takenumas so far, but it's still a powerful effect.
Yeah, for example, I was mind-boggled that those blue-black control decks that finished kind of high recently were playing 0 Takenumas. It's like super weird to me. Yeah. This land is so good in that deck.
If the deck is heavily relying on Lurrus, Takenuma should be like the auto-include one of...
Especially if you are not playing red for Korrigan's command.
Yeah.
It's like... That was one of my biggest beefs with blue-black, that you just can't rebuy Lurrus, and now you can do it on a land. And people are like, but you have Archmage's Charm in your deck, you can't really play it. And I'm like, dude, you are playing 3 fucking Sunken Ruins anyways. So just play painless Black Swords, because your Sunken Ruins will fix mana for your Charm or your counter spell.
Or whatever.
So. And even... 3-0 was playing the version with Death Shadows, and they had the Fleabland, Agadim's Awakening, and no Cat Takenuma, and I was like,
okay, that's...
I get that this is a land that lets you pay free for and grow your shadows, but come on. Like, also they were playing shadows with 3 Dark Scriptures in their deck, which was like... I don't know. Like, they've had 4 Watery Graves. I'll give them that. But you can just build your mana with like 4 Watery Graves, 12 fetch lands, and then the shadow will be great.
Yeah. Okay. Moving forward, there are also other cards outside lands that are important in Kamigawa. In my opinion, like at very first, we were thinking that Lion Sash will be the most impactful one, but it quickly turned out that
are not afraid of admitting that we made a mistake, because Lion Sash is not only not the most impactful card from the set, it's not the most impactful equipment from the set.
Yeah,
because that title goes to Reality Chip, or the Reality Chip. I think that chip. The is like, I get it's there because it's legendary, but as I think it was Justin Timberlake in one of those movies, I think it was Social Network, when they were inventing Facebook, and he said, just drop the D, it's cleaner this way. And Reality Chip just sounds better than the Reality Chip. I think it was in Social Network when Zuckerberg came to him and he said that he wanted to invent the Facebook. He was like, just Facebook, it looks better. But yeah, well, it's legendary, so I understand why D is there, but still, like, everybody will just call it Reality Chip. And if I bet that when Paper Tournaments comes back and you will start registering deck lists, so many people just write reality chip instead of the reality chip, and it won't cause them game loss or anything because the card is still like identifiable. But just my ramblings about like whatever, which is super unimportant.
3-minute rambling about D in the D reality chip. Nice.
It was minute and a half. I'm looking at the timer right now.
For me, it was 3 minutes. And
now it was 15 seconds of you incorrectly accusing me of rambling for 3 minutes instead of minutes and a half. So Okay.
Moving forward.
Reality chip is really good.
Yeah, it's a really good card. And in my opinion, it's the reason that Hammer was always looking for some tools to grind, because doesn't matter how you build your Hammer deck, as long as you have Sigardas 8, Hammer and cheap creatures, you will have fast kills. And turn 3 kills are still alive. Even turn 2 kills is still achievable. But the fact that you can kill on turn 3 and have a really good late game is something that's scary, in my opinion. And the reality chip gives yet another angle of attacking a card advantage war, because so far you have Urza's Saga, which is extremely good in terms of value. You have Lurrus, you have Stoneforge Mystic that just for a rare card. You have Piercing Paladin that draws cards, Esper Sentinel. There are a lot of card advantage engines, and then yet by a cost of playing just one card, there's 2 trouble with Stoneforge Mystic and Steel Shaper's Gift, whatever.
I think you can play more than one, but that's a discussion for later.
You can play, for example, one main, one side, but Bidnash.
I think you can play 2 main deck easy.
In my opinion, it's meta game dependent.
Yep.
But I can see it.
Yeah.
And the card single-handedly can win the game, because Future Sight for 2 mana, if you have Piercing Paladin or Sigardas 8, is a really powerful effect.
That's true, but with an asterisk, I would say. As we already discussed yesterday with Sodek and with our friend Alan, I do think that reality chip actually can weirdly makes you a bit worse against decks that are really bigger than you, because you'd rather kill them than draw extra cards. I am so much more scared of people tutoring plating than reality chip against me when I'm playing control decks, because I think that reality chip will be really good against Grixis Death Shadow or Murktide, when drawing that 2 or 3 extra cards will be super important. But for every situation when your reality chip just draws you a bunch of cards against control deck, you will have those situations in which you pay 2 mana and you pay 3 mana, and then you get a removal spell aimed at your thing and you lose massive amounts of tempo. It reminds me very much of Urza's Saga, which is Urza's Saga has such a high floor or low floor and such a high ceiling in those matchups, because if you have a removal spell for Urza's Saga or for tokens, if you have explosives or dress down, you really want your opponent to place Urza's Saga on 2, because they will spend 6 mana to make 2 tokens and you just answer them for 2 mana. And you trade 1 for 1, but they lose massive amounts of tempo, and tempo is super important in those matchups. So it's a similar situation when your opponent has no answer to Urza's Saga, it's really good, but if they have answer to Urza's Saga, it's really bad, quite often. And the same thing will happen, in my opinion, with reality chip. When they have removal, it's even if you draw 1 or 2 cards with it, whatever, if they have removal spell, it's not good for you because you spend a very large amount of mana to do that. Of course, if you have Sigardas 8, it's much better.
Yeah, that's the problem.
But in general, if you have Sigardas 8 and they don't have removal spell and you tutor for an equipment, they are dead anyways. So people will have removal spell against you if they are playing against 4-color or Grixis or whatever.
But how about the 4th removal in a row, because you need to answer every creature every single time. That's the problem. Killing the first one isn't the problem. Killing the 3rd creature, the 4th creature.
Yeah, but you can just kill a reality chip. You can just kill it because it's a creature. And
yeah, that's true.
And that makes it like that. I'm gonna go back to cranial plating. Cranial plating is a lower mana investment in equip because it's only one, and it really makes you kill every Mem Knight. If you have Fatal Push, they have Mem Knight, and they have plating, you are fucked because you have to kill Mem Knight. You can't kill plating with push. But if they have reality chip instead and they equip, you can just kill a reality chip and they are still left with shitty MM Knight or Ornithopter or whatever. So I do think that reality chip will be really good in those like mid-rangey matchups like Death Shadow, Murktide. It will win you a lot of games. It will win you a bunch of games in the mirror because what matters the most in the mirror, especially post-board, is like Lurrus plus Seal of Cleansing or Lurrus plus Scatter Commando, and Reality Chip lets you dig towards that faster. And it will win you some games against like grinder decks as well. Of course, against 4-color, against like control decks. It will. But I think that once again, the biggest improvement for Hammer is against those mid-range decks, in my opinion. It will move the needle there significantly while being like somewhat neutral against like bigger decks. Or bigger control decks, that is. It's very good against non-interactive decks though. Like it's very good against decks that can't really kill your stuff, like your creatures. Like for example, if you are playing against Amulet and they have like, I don't know, a Boseju plus Force of Vigor or whatever, and they just kill your early Onslaught, they won't have another removal spell quite often. So you just tutor for chip and you rebuild in like turn or two. So plus also, chip is a card that kinda requires you, I think, or maybe not requires you, but incentivizes you to build your deck a bit differently. Like people have been playing.
I wanted to tell it about that in like our Hammer section.
Okay, we can move forward because it's been already like 20 minutes discussing impact of Kamigawa, and we can just talk about this Hammer specific cards when it comes to Hammer. So yeah. Without any further ado, unless you have something else to add about Kamigawa.
Sky Turtle is really cool in Living End. And I want to say hello to Colossal Sky Turtle.
Sky Turtle is pretty cool. Moonster prototype is pretty cool.
I forgot about Moonster. It's really cool, but it will be on the list, so whatever.
Yeah, also, the card that I'm kind of looking forward to be good in many formats is the Red-Black Artifact. Oni Cult Anvil, I think it's called. The red-black one. It's red-black artifact. It's already insane in Pioneer. It's like it's winning everything in Pioneer in the red-black deck. It's red-black artifact. Whenever an artifact you control dies, you make a 1/1 artifact construct, and it can trigger only once each turn. And it has tap, sacrifice an artifact, and drain one, I think. So in those like food decks. This type of strategies, I think this card might be strong. We'll talk about it later as well, because I think it's something worth talking when we arrive at Giant Lurrus decks. Because I think there's a lot of potential here that's kind of wasted by just playing generically good Giant cards, and you can just play something else, and your deck might be better for it. Okay, so we're gonna jump to our usual explanation segment. If you are watching this video for the first time, now you will understand why we grade those decks this way, the way we do. And after that, we'll be back for our main segment, which is the metagame tier list. Don't go anywhere. Okay, so we've already went over our tier system in our first video, but thanks to Sodek's brilliant idea, we've decided to record this part as a separate segment that we'll just put in every tier list update, so it will be more convenient for those of you who are watching us for the first time to learn how we understand different letter grades given out to various decks. If you've already watched this segment in one of our previous videos, feel free to skip it because it was literally copied and pasted in the post-production and it's identical to its predecessor in our previous videos. Our biggest problem with the tier system was lack of meaning behind different tiers itself. Without a proper context, you can argue with your friend whether a certain deck is tier 1 or tier 2, only to find out that you both might meant the same thing by saying tier 1 or tier 2, but your understanding of what tier 1 or tier 2 mean were different. Because of that, it was vital for us to create a unified system as to avoid any misunderstandings. There are many qualities by which you can describe a deck, but we've decided to stick to two different axes: raw power and positioning. What do we mean by raw power? For example, a deck that presents a fast, stable combo kill backed up by multiple layers of interaction is a deck with high raw power. Living End comes to mind as such deck, thanks to being a one-card combo with a lot of cantrips and free interaction. Other archetypes that's high on this spectrum can be Murktide Regent. Consistent 2-color mana base, a smattering of highest quality threats and answers, and great sideboard options speak for themselves. How about a deck with low raw power level then? Well, it's harder to find those decks in a format as powerful as Modern, and previously we did have Mill as an example of a low raw power level deck, but I think that's actually Burn that suits that description the best. It is doing the same rather unimpressive thing every game. Its cards are not great individually, just look at Shard Volley or Skullcrack, and the strategy is easy to hate out, but it can be a contextually strong choice in the right metagame. Hence our use of two axes to better describe the overall strength of any given deck. To distinguish between decks that are lower and higher on the raw power spectrum, we are using terms bad decks and good decks, respectively. Notice that both of those adjectives are in quotation marks, and they are not the only factor when it comes to the overall quality of the archetype in question. A low raw power level deck can be good or even great choice on a weekend, and those words are just making it easier for us to communicate with you and each other. Second axis is positioning, and here the description is much more straightforward. Decks that are low on this metric are poorly positioned, and decks that are high are well positioned. When it comes to tiers, we've decided to split our tier list into 4 different tiers: S, A, B, and C. S tier is fairly obvious. It's just best deck, or decks at the moment. Sometimes it will be one deck, sometimes multiple, and other times there won't be any S tier decks. As far as A, B, and C tiers go, those rough guidelines will help you understand what we mean by those tiers. Most of the time, A tier decks are both high in raw power and well positioned. B tier decks are good on one of those axes but low on the other one. So for example, if Living End, a deck that I've already deemed as a really strong deck in terms of raw power, is poorly positioned, it will end up being in B tier most of the time. Conversely, if the metagame is favorable for Burn, a low power level deck, it will also end up in the B tier. And sometimes, if it's extremely well positioned, it can even end up in the A tier. Keep in mind that those cases of low-powered decks in A tier will be few and far between and won't happen more than a couple weekends per year for any given archetype. And then the C tier decks are, in our opinion, irredeemable under certain conditions that are true in the format at any given point. To sum it all up, we've prepared this handy-dandy TLDR for you. So, to recap, S tier decks are best deck or best decks in the format. A tier decks are either well-positioned good decks or very well-positioned bad decks. B tier decks are either poorly positioned good decks or well-positioned bad decks. And finally, C tier are poorly positioned bad decks. Note that those guidelines are not always true, and sometimes a high raw power level deck, such as Living End, might end up in a C tier if it's really poorly positioned, according to us. Or that not every deck in B tier is either high on raw power and low on positioning, and the other way around. Sometimes there will be a deck that's mediocre on both of those axes, and it will end up being in a B tier anyways. Thanks for watching this explanatory segment, and let's jump right back into the video. Okay, so as always, welcome to our main segment, and to not prolong this video any more than we already have and will be, of course, let's jump to our first deck, which is 4-color Blink. No, just 4 color. We decided to, well, not we really, people decided to stop playing Eternal Witness in their decks, and we just make the switch that we needed to do, which is just label this deck as 4-color. Some people are still playing some ephemerates and Radam Skull, but for the most part, let's call it the canister version, which is 4-color good cards. You're playing Ragavans, you're playing Deluges, you're playing main deck counter spells. You're just playing a pile of good cards, and not as much of a like synergistic ephemerate, witness, time warp stuff like you used to play before. I really like this change personally. I think that the synergistic deck was kinda clunky, and if you mulligan once against Death Shadow and you have like mull to 6 and you draw ephemerate, it's like terrible.
Yeah, ephemerate without a target, or like when you can jump into 2-for-1. Okay.
Also, this deck is now way better against Dresden than it was. Back in the day, Dresden was a card that you actively wanted in the matchup because it stopped Cattle, it stopped Witness, it stopped some random things like Wandering Mind. And right now, I'm not even sideboarding in Dresdens against this deck because, you will stop a trigger from Omnath. Cool, but you have to kill it anyways. Yeah, and you do. And also the addition of Ragavan is like super important, I think, because now you have to keep removal post board against it. And you have to keep a lot of removal because if Ragavan connects once even, it's sometimes really hard to come back from that because of how well this deck utilizes treasures. I think it is by far the best Ragavan decks when it comes to utilizing treasures. Because you have so many expensive cards, your curve is so much higher than most Ragavan decks because most Ragavan decks are Lurrus decks or Murktide. And this is the deck that can go turn 1 Ragavan, turn 2 Teferi from your own deck. You don't have to snipe it from your opponent's deck. And your opponent has to play Teferi in first place to do that. You can go turn 1 Ragavan, attack, turn 2 Treasure, attack, turn 3, Treasure. Well, if you get to hit with Ragavan, it's usually over anyways. But in this deck, you can just play Omnath off of those 2 treasures on turn 3, play Fetch, crack the Fetch, and you have 5 mana on turn 3 with Omnath already in play. It's like insane how snowbally Ragavan can be in this deck. So you really need to have removal spells against this deck, which is not ideal unless your removal spells are named Unholy Heat and Prismatic Ending. Memory Deluge also a really good card, a really good way to utilize Omnath mana. Also, plus it pairs really well with like Solitude and the counter spell. I personally really like this approach on 4-color, and for me, it's easy as.
In my opinion, it's like when I was thinking about the S tier, it's like these are like actually the best decks, and I was very close between S and A. I ended up also on S tier, but like other decks that are in the S tier, like you'll see in the future which one will be. Spoiler alert.
As you can see, Sodek's deck is right here, like far from the S because Sodek thinks it's S minus. So this is our graphical representation and not my mistake at all.
Okay, sure. Like the deck is really good. I like the approach that's less clunky. Like I kept saying that like these decks are really good at fighting like the top tier, for example, like Hammer, Shadow, whatever. But they were struggling a bit against random combo decks because how slow they were at closing out the game. Right now with Ragavan, with main deck counter spells, it's harder. Like for instance, Belcher still is probably advantaged, but the advantage is not that big anymore because still the opening Ragavan into turn 3 Omnath plus mana can steal games, and you really need to respect the deck and at least have some form of plan against it.
Yep. And before, I think it was to win against Belcher as 4-color, especially game 1, you just had to pray that Belcher mulligans into Oblivion or something. Like it wasn't up to you to win those games pre-board. But now you can just go like Murktide style, Ragavan into counterspell and just keep smashing them, and You will win sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes.
Also, we are much better against Blood Moon now with Ragavan.
Yeah, that's actually funny because like I saw 4-color players siding in Magus of the Moon versus, for example, Amulet or like other
I
decks.
think Canister said that it was just Amulet. Some people are like historically overzealous in sideboarding Magus and Blood Moon, and they like to sideboard it in against everything basically.
I just don't like the approach because like Blood Moon loses so much power when it's like
It's
when
known.
you are when it's known, when you like showing the opponent by fetching basics early instead of duals. Especially with decks with Triumph, if you go for your second basic, opponent really knows that Blood Moon
Yeah, that's why I like
can
Magus
break.
basically only against Amulet, and then like
Yeah,
Tron.
yeah, if it happens to be somewhere.
Yep.
And overall, I think it's a really good deck. You should play it if you have access to it and you like this old Jant style, just playing like all good expensive cards.
Yeah, it's basically 2022 power level Jant, right?
Yeah, that's true.
It's a cross between like Jant and more control deck. It really reminds me of the Siege Rhino Abzan control decks from Standard. When you play like Siege Rhinos and Elspeth Sun's Champion, you're just playing. Technically, you are playing a mid-range deck with like, but your Siege Rhino is much better because it's Omnath and you don't have Cursor of Crucifix, you have Ren and 6 and Teferi. But you also have this top end of like Yorion into blinking a bunch of stuff, which goes over the top of most things, just like Elspeth Sun's Champion went over the top of most things in Standard. So yeah, I think this deck is really good, and if you are not legally obliged to play it or obligated to play Lurrus, as I am, because I signed contract with Satan himself, and I have to play Lurrus till the day Lurrus is banned, because if I don't, I just go insane. Then I would recommend trying this deck because it's pretty strong. Okay, moving to the next deck, which is Affinity. But as you can see, it's not any stinky frogmites ever again. It's all about FOD monitors, baby. It's all about FOD monitors and podcasts. And some people were cutting podcasts, but like Menguchi played this deck and he said that I don't like podcasts in this deck. I think he's playing with Erza.
Like Erza is kind of fine, but like I also feel that like playing at least like 2 or 3 podcasts is kind of in the deck.
I think that my biggest beef with the deck, because I thought about it today, when compared to the 8-cast deck in Legacy.
That's not.
The problem is that your cards, like your draw effects, don't really draw into anything that impressive. I really am like, I think this deck is really missing the Sai Master Top Terrorist angle from Legacy, or now they are playing the Kappa Cannoneer or whatever it is called.
Kappa Cannoneer is like
the 100 ticket turtle.
But and it's extremely broken, the deck.
But I really like Sai because it's something that lets you get a payoff from your like from air that you play in your deck because you need to play it. Like you can go like turn 1 Sai, make a token, turn 2 play FOD monitor, draw cards, make more tokens, play more FOD monitors, make more tokens, and then it's suddenly really hard for your opponent to do anything, especially if they're not playing sweepers, which are not that popular in Legacy. I know that Meltdown has become a sideboard staple these days.
A very expensive sideboard staple, to be honest.
I think very expensive on Modo, right? It's not very expensive.
Yeah. Okay, about Affinity, like there's one thing why Affinity returned. It's because of the new printing. Moonsnipe prototype is like a Spring Gift Drum 2.0, and like it looks the same, but it forced the deck to be rebuilt completely. Like first of all, the mana had to be changed. Because Monster Prototype costs blue, you need to have enough blue sources to cast it, and after that your monster prototype gives you only colorless mana, so you actively need to have your colored mana from lands. That's why, and you already need to play for the Urza Saga because it's Urza Saga. So the versions that were playing 8 artifact lands in form of Darkseid Citadel and Treasure Vault are not as popular anymore, and the deck is very focused right now on card advantage. Like nowadays, Affinity plays a lot of draw 2 effects like Urza Saga, Urza alone, Nettlecyst as a really big threat that ends games, and Metallic Rebukes from time to time. And that's it. Like your game plan is to play cheap stuff so you can play your expensive stuff to draw cards or play huge keys on the battlefield. Is it good enough? Against many decks, actually it is, because you have like solid card advantage. You can, like, your creatures aren't that easy to kill because like some of them, for example, your saga tokens will often be bigger than Unholy Hit, for example. Or you have fort monitors that are not killable but by for example fatal push or whatever. Plus your Nettlecyst makes your like all other creatures really powerful threats. Overall, the deck has problems with like fast killing. Still, you have your like turn 3 kills if you go turn 1 Saga Drum, bunch of zeros into turn 2 token, into turn 3 Nettlecyst equip, for instance. But in reality, it's quite hard to consistently kill before turn 4. On turn 4 is achievable, but it's not very easy. So if we compare Blue-White Affinity to Hammer looks just as a better deck, and I don't know if there's a easy way to change it. Like there are some things that are for Affinity side. For instance, the deck is not that poor versus Engineered Explosive, for example, but it's like Engineered Explosive are still a problem for the deck, but it's not as a big problem as it is for the Hammer. But overall, I feel that Affinity is a fine deck. It's not something that we get used to from like Mox Opal era, but it's cool that the artifact based aggro / mid-range deck has an option to exist in the format, and I like it.
Okay, your final grade for the deck.
B. It's a solid B tier.
B. Yeah.
And I like
Similarly
it.
For me.
I like it in this position because for me, for example, it's a really good deck for FLMs. I really like playing it, but I would try to find a very specific metagame for it to be a playable option for the bigger tournament. For instance, a lot of Grixis decks, because I believe it's a good matchup, and a lot of like random junk. Maybe with like more rebukes than like spell-based combo could be a good matchups, but it's hard to achieve.
Yeah, I do agree that Affinity is quite visibly better than Hammer against Grixis decks, because you don't have the same Lurrus explosives or Lurrus dress down endgame you have against Hammer, which is like very easy to achieve and hard to disrupt for them. Like, I guess somewhat easy to achieve, not very easy, because they can just kill you. But yeah, I do think Affinity is a pretty decent choice, and if you like Affinity back in the day, I would just give it a try now. Moving onwards to another deck that gets a pretty important addition from Neon Dynasty. It is Amulet. Don't know why I did that. And Amulet got Boseju, as we already said. And we already said in the introduction, I think, most things we wanted to say about Amulet. Boseju really helps against Blood Moon. It really helps against Hammer. Which were like Belcher. I think Boseju really helps against Amulet biggest problems, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's true. Like Still, the big problem for the Amulet is the lack of threats, but the colossal, not Dreadmo,
Cultivator Colossus.
oh yeah, Cultivator Colossus, helped the deck a bit. And with like, I was talking to Pandenwine why he changed from the Karn, the Great Creator approach to more Cultivator Colossus, and like, but the Bossager was the missing piece to the puzzle. Once you have Bossagers, you have more like disruption needed to fight these problematic cards. So you don't need to go to Karn, so then you can go for more Temper Symbiosis with Cultivator Colossus, etc. etc. As a result, it's probably a way to go for the deck, and I really like its position, and I feel it will be a much stronger contender than it was like 3-4 months ago, but when it had its moment, but overall it was a poor choice. I'm curious how Amulet will look in like 2 months from now, or how it will be positioned in the meta game, because I believe that like matchup versus Hammer is not that bad anymore. Matchup versus Grixis Shadow is still bad, but like all other decks like Murktide and like all this random shit you can play against, Amulet has much bigger chances nowadays. So mm, yeah, for me it's a solid B still, and like with an option in my opinion to maybe go to A one day with this upgrade. What do you think?
Okay, so I'm making a leap of faith here, and I'm giving Amulet a chance for A. I do think that Amulet right now got an important printing in Boseju. I think it covers a fair amount of ground that was before like a vulnerability of the deck. I do think that the matchup against Shadow is not ideal, but you can like people went back to playing Turn Timber Symbiosis, which I think is something you can do with Colossus because then you have enough hits that really matter, and suddenly you are getting pretty good against Fossies because you have a lot of hits and you can even play Symbiosis early on and then bounce it with your Karuland to hide it from Fossies, which is cool. So I am an Amulet believer right now. I do think that the deck is pretty strong, and I'm excited to see what Amulet experts like Pant or like Mistaken, who debated a showcase by the way with the deck, can do right now. Like Jose Moniz, those type of players who are just really proficient with Amulet. Yeah, I think Amulet is just good. It's just good now. Okay, moving on to the deck, just medium or maybe even worse. Belcher. I think that Belcher is probably one of the biggest losers of Boseju. For many reasons.
I would even say that it's one of the biggest losers in like whole Kamigawa as a
Yeah, and when I actually said that about Boseju, I forgot for a second that they can actually just strip mine you with it. I was just talking about Boseju killing like Belcher or Blood Moon or stuff like this. So
like okay, I was still testing with Canister playing for color with 4 Bosejus and Vren and like bunch of counter spells, and it was still relatively easy for me to win. So it's not like Boseju is the end of the end of story.
it's not? What? But you were
But
so sure. You were so sure that Belcher will be unplayable forever.
yeah, crying is like part of my magic nature. So
It's part of
I
your job
had to,
description, definitely.
yeah, that's true. So I think that Belcher is still fine. Like Bob 49 still top rated like both challenges, and I was testing the deck and I still have decent results. Still, like every deck, maybe not every, but like many decks got like tiny upgrades in the Belcher matchup because you have like, or a big upgrade if you have Boseju, or a tiny upgrade if you have, for example, Otawara, because now your Belcher and keep Pact of Negation plan is just much worse because they can just bounce Belcher.
Or
and it's
Prototype.
harder.
It can also bounce Belcher.
Yeah, and that's also annoying. Still, you have good matchups you want to play against, for example, for color, or like these funny decks like Blue White Affinity, or like some form of
Amulet
Judge
probably
Shadow.
still.
Still, but it's like closer. Like you didn't like okay from the budget perspective, you didn't get anything spectacular. Although there's one new card that's played in the deck right now. It's March of Reckless Joy. Like it's a very strange divination, like or like
It's
memory
a
and deluge that
it's
plays to the board.
yeah, it's a cross between Divination and Dig Through Time, I guess, for the deck.
Yeah, kinda.
So somewhere in the middle.
But in my opinion, it's played not because it's really good. It's more because other cards are really bad. For instance, playing Blood Moon main deck right now does not make that much sense, and I don't like it. It's a stinker, like Henrik showing it perfectly. As like the same thing is with Fury. Like playing 2 for 1 Fury to kill opponent's Ragavan is not something I want to do. For example, if I want to prepare for Ragavan decks, I would play Gas Shots first, then Fury. And because there are no like really good cards in the main deck, like hate cards you can play. You can still play Pact of Negations, but you can play only 4 of them. So then it's a nice way to play like 2 or 3 March, and they will be fine. At least, like what I liked about March is that it was much easier for me to keep one landers with red because March could convert my Ironcrag feats, drone Reforges, or like any other useless card for like another dig into cards for more land drops, which was cool. Still, like your best matchups got a bit worse. Your bad matchups are still kind of bad. So it's not as well positioned as it used to be, and I still believe it's a B deck. It's like turn free kills are still something you want to do, but for me it's more like a B with a like, tiny minus on it, not B plus.
Yep. I basically trust Sodek with the expertise. B deck for me as well. Not much else to say. Well, I guess I wanted to ask, how's the Burn matchup with Belcher? It's probably good, right?
Not that much because like you pay yourself with your lands and they can raise
I
you.
guess that's true.
But on the other hand, Burn isn't that popular anymore, so like still you are a deck with Lane of Sanctity, so that helps. But on the other hand, they have Deflecting Palm, so it's problematic. The last thing about Belcher I forgot. Before Kamigawa, like Pyromancer Ascension loops with Recross was the like both cool and very effective way to play around many effects. Right now with Boseju in the format, I'm not that sure if that's good anymore because if you let opponents draw 7 cards and they have like 3 Bosejus, there's a very big chance that they will have it. And that means that if you go Ascension, you can even build your pile with Pact of Negation, which like earlier was a very big strength of creating this pile. Right now, Boseju plays around Pact of Negations pretty well.
And defense guild if you
And
are playing that card as well.
yeah, and that's just rude if I'm going for it. And I'm trying to avoid Ascension at any cost.
Okay, so moving on to the deck that's not widely played anymore in the Eyes of Sodek, it is Burn. Well, I don't think there is much to say about Burn. It's still a deck that tries to laser your opponents to death and still doing the same thing, and you didn't really get any new printings from Kamigawa, so you are just
Some said that Ronin can be good, but like
come
it's
on.
laughable. Yeah, come on.
I think it's a pioneer level card at best.
It's still probably bad.
Like
Because, you can't
it checks
do-
a bunch of things. It's a cheap artifact. It's a hasty attacker for 1 mana. It can
Draws a
cycle
card later
to gives
on.
you delirium, but it's like most of those things are not things that Bern is interested in really. So
True.
I
I still
I don't
believe
know.
that like Bern can surprise people because like as long as you don't have like any form of live gain actions, you can lose to Bern and that will happen. Like
Yep.
format can change, but Bern will
Yeah, and
always
4 color
still be
matchup against
somewhere.
Bern is actually Bern favorites from what I've heard. So so maybe that's a window of opportunity that Bern needs, especially when you add the Ragavans, right? Like,
Yeah, because like
Ragavan is
now
a
we have like
prime target for
Searing Blaze, yeah?
Searing Blaze, so I can definitely see Bern being good against 4 color.
Yeah,
But
and there's also another way to look at things because Grixis Shadow is one of the most popular decks, and the matchup is even some people say that is even a bit advantaged for the Burn
it's
side.
something that we in League of Legends community call skill matchup. So when you win, you are saying that you win because you played better, and when you lose, you say that you got lucky.
Like always, I'm always unlucky when I'm losing, so easy. Okay, still for me, Burn is not really well positioned right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if I lose it to it from time to time, but I wouldn't recommend it registering it for the beginning tournament. C.
Okay, so for me, every single time when I'm deciding, it's close between B and C for me. I'm just looking at facts. Bern starts with B, hence B. That's pretty easy. And that's why our next deck, which is Creativity, goes to C for me, because it starts with C. And that's the kind of analysis you want. And in all seriousness, I do think that Bern is a deck that is pretty okay. And it's still a choice once again that can surprise, and still something that is not. It's never like a terrible choice. It's most of the time an exciting choice. Unlike Creativity, which I think is a bad choice. And I think my biggest beef with you wanted to say something about Bern, or
No,
shall we move to
about creativity, so go on.
Yeah, so my biggest beef with Creativity, and the reason I give it C, it's C not only for C as in Creativity, it's also C as in crappy deck builders, I think, or crappy deck building. I do think that Creativity is a pretty unexplored shell, and I do think that 2-color Creativity decks have potential to be really good compared to like 5 or 4-color counterparts. I do have high hopes against about blue-red Creativity. I think that's an interesting addition. Like, I guess it's technically Grixis because you are playing like 2 Blood Crypts to cast your Archon if you draw it.
And then you can play this card, and that's like I wanted to say that like I like 2 approaches for the deck, but like I always find something more interesting to play with. And like I like 2 approaches that can be really good. The first is like this blue-red / Grixis, and I think like putting Archons to play can be really good.
And this approach will be much better with Grixis Triumph. When it gets printed at some point, it will be.
Yeah, so it will be worth to reconsider the idea later on. But the other thing is that like the red-green shells or like giant shells maybe with careful cultivation.
Yeah, the ramp shell
Could be
basically.
good. Yeah. Like careful cultivation with channel is like something that the deck would really love to have, but still like there's a lack of giant triumph. Like the giant triumph would really help. I think that like when we get the other cycle of triumphs, like creativity will be one of the decks that will at least try to benefit it because it uses
What's the last one? Naya. You can also.
yeah,
Naya is
Maya
probably
can
not.
be Naya can be good because you can splash easier for like the fairy or whatever you
Yeah,
want
but
to.
in general, I do like the combo control route with this archetype, like
Mm-hmm.
blue-red. This deck, first deck in years that can actually want to play Remand, because you can't really afford to play counterspell with double blue in this deck.
Mm-hmm.
And Remand does what you want to do, which is
Like reverse your
delaying
turn.
stuff and replacing itself. Or you can just play Mana Leak, which is a perfectly like fine card if you
I
can't
still
afford
believe
counterspell.
if you want to draw one of your 4 creativities, and you can still play like Transmogrify, yeah? Like 4 mana test or
Transmogrify, yeah.
something. Yeah, but it's like more vulnerable to removal, etc. So it's not that well positioned in my opinion.
Yep.
Still, creativity as a card is a really powerful one, and I like the concept, but I don't like the like everything else
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah, but yeah, basically, I like the ramp route. I like the combo control route. I don't like the wonky mid-range good stuff route that you can just play with 4-color better, because you are a 4-color deck that also tries to play all mountains and 4 dwarven mines. That's not really great, I think. So,
That's green.
like, I
That's
know this deck
green.
has some results, but I do like the more streamlined versions much better. Okay.
Yeah, let's hope that it will be
Are you
more
in
explored later on.
C stands for creativity camp as well?
See.
Yeah, and so they won't tell you that because he's a coward, but he also chooses those grades just like me. Like the first names, first letters.
Which is C? Like this part? No, sorry, this part is C.
But I have
Okay, got
Amulet.
this.
I have Amulet in A. I have
Nice.
Affinity in B, which doesn't make sense. But I have Creativity in C, and
Belcher and Burn in
Belcher
B.
in B,
Nice.
Bern in B, and I will have, spoiler alert, Shadow in S, and I have four-color soup. You like to call it soup in S as well, so everything just makes sense. Sadly, very, very sadly, we don't have a D category for our next deck, which is Dredge. And that's where Dredge belongs. No,
Okay, quick.
the only deck that ever belonged in D is Phoenix. So
Yeah, that's true.
fuck
Uh,
Phoenix, man. Such a
don't
terrible deck.
don't play the card unless you are playing Pioneer. Then it's good.
That's true. Or maybe Historic, I don't know.
Okay. About I don't know about historical who plays Arena. About Dredge. Like Dredge didn't get anything new. Also, Dredge is not very much affected by the new cards. Like the only problem I could think about is Boseju, but like after you add like one Steam Vents, like as a 19th land, or you can just replace one Spike of Kanaway with Steam Vents, it's kind of whatever, because if opponent wants to play 2 Bosejus instead of like deploying to the board or stopping your spells, you should win anyway. Still, the deck has its problems. The deck has its good matchups in form of like Grixis, 4-color to some extent, some other fair decks. It still struggles against the same decks, like always. It still struggles against Hammer, against Amulet, against like other combo decks like Belcher. And if you're like a Dredge fans, sure, go for it, play it. And I was like this close to registering Dredge for my local tournament. It will like for Paprikash. It will happen this weekend in Warsaw. But I'm playing one event in team, and I don't want to play a deck that's not like considered as a really good one. Like when we are playing in groups of
Wow,
3, and
your
I'm playing.
teammates must have been really lucky for you to not consider this awful deck. They have
Yeah,
to
what do
be
you
really
think? Yeah.
cool guys if you don't want to burden them with playing with Dredge in their team.
Yeah, like
I'm
yeah,
playing with
like
Sodek.
yeah, that's the and like other podcast from Polish, from Polish side is also playing it, playing in our team.
Our friend, not
Yeah,
another podcast, as Sodek said. We are
podcast
not
like
friends
podcast
with.
member. Yeah,
Yeah,
I understand.
we're not friends with like a
Podcast.
digital way to convey
Yeah, I
informations.
ate a word, whatever. Okay, overall, in my opinion, it's B, but I don't know if it's B because I like the deck or if it's really good. It kind of lacks the like serious results, but I feel the power for B is there.
Okay, so I will keep mine short and simple, sweet. I think Sodex B stands for biased, and I think that the Dredge really has some problems, and the one that Sodek didn't mention was that it's just not a good deck. That's why it's in C, in my opinion.
OMG, I'm
But
waiting for
now
Grixis
we are
for
moving
roast.
to uh, decks that are just, I guess, at this point, pretty unanimously heralded as best decks in the format. Or this one, then we have a hill that I will die on, and then we have another great deck. So we'll start with Death Shadow.
Good deck,
Great deck.
really good one. And Jędrek, why do you think Grixis of Shadow is really good, and why do you think that other versions of Grixis are better to be played in a big tournament?
Okay. Why Grixis is good? Death Shadow is good.
Grixis Death Shadow, which is important.
Have you ever played Legacy? Or watched Legacy? Or followed Legacy?
I was playing Legacy a lot before.
Okay.
Like,
Have you paid attention to Legacy in like last 10 years, I guess?
Kinda.
Grixis Death Shadow is basically Delver. It's
What?
the best tempo deck with the best answers and threats, and it's really mana efficient, and it has some potential to grind. And it's just a bunch of best cards, and you can play Lurrus, which is super broken. So that's why Grixis Death Shadow, I think, squarely lies for both of us in A tier.
S tier. What to say?
Or S tier, yeah. That's what I was trying to say.
Remember the times when Grixis Death Shadow was the like very fresh deck in a week 2. I think that Aspiring Spike was playing it with Dredge down. It was kind of cool, and then
So they're basically asking me, do you remember this December?
no, I think it was earlier. Even.
No, I think Soulstrong's run started in like November, December. That's when the Soulstrong run started.
Okay,
it definitely wasn't on anybody's radar. Like anybody, well, Aspiring Spike was playing it. And like I remember the Paprikash that happened in the end of August, and people were playing Death Shadow, but some of those people were playing Death Shadow because it was first event after the pandemic started, and people just had this deck from before and liked this deck. But I do think that it was mostly an Aspiring Spike effect, as it happens quite often. But I do think that Grixis Shadow became a fixture of the format basically 3 months ago, something like that.
Okay.
And
still, at very first, like it wasn't considered as it was like no one has any results outside Soulstrong.
Soulstrong, yeah.
Soulstrong, yeah, and like.
Well, it happened very fast, from what I recall.
For the first few weeks, it was ignored because like only one player can have results.
No. When Soulstrong won like everything in the 2 week span, like in 2 weeks, he like top 4 PTQ, won 2 challenges, and top 4 2 another challenges. Everybody started playing Shadow after those 2 weeks. Like grinders just started to play Shadow, and they've been playing Shadow ever since. And I do think that the turning point was just a very strong player who started playing the deck and actually shown people that they don't have to be afraid of some stupid cards. Like people were like, yeah, but you're playing Death Shadow against Solitude and you're getting 2 for 1 if you have 2 Death Shadows in play. And then an intellectual like Soulstrong will say, dude, you just don't have to play 2 Shadows at the same time when you're playing against Solitude.
Very big brain. Actually.
It's not hard. Like just play better. Don't be an idiot, basically. Just play your cards well.
And it reminds me like you know this meme when someone is like riding a bike and like
put like a stick into his own wheels. Yeah,
it is basically the same.
yeah, that's true.
So we are in a position when Grixis Shadow is so efficient, so good, and has a grinding potential with like Crocs and Lurrus. And like I was like maybe not a bit skeptical. I was like, yeah, that like has some like problems, downsides, etc. And then I started to like watching more like when people are playing the deck, and it's just insane. Like if you want to play fair, you can play Grixis Shadow or you play 4-color, because 4-color it's slower but has even better late game. So you just pick your tempo deck or more control-ish route with 4-color, and I don't see any big reason to play anything else that tries to play this type of game plan and like, do things. Because, for instance, Blue at Affinity it's more focused on card advantage and does not have any ways to interact or that many ways to interact. That's why like it's not like the same thing. If you want to interact, if you want to like pressure with creatures into what to have like the mix of drawing the log and discard, I strongly believe that Death Shadow is basically the best what you can do.
The Shadow is a really strong deck. To answer the other part of our question, and we can move to, I guess, our second deck in Grixis colors. Why do I like this deck better? To stay with our legacy analogy. There are those people who play Delver because Delver is the best deck. And there are those people who play like 4-color blue piles that are supposed to beat up on Delver because they want to win against Delver. And they are losing against a bunch of other decks. But whatever.
But like, isn't this 4-color correlates to our 4-color from Modern?
Well, yes, but actually no. So I guess
I feel that your deck is like I will be like because you were mean.
Oh, I know. This is not 4-color deck. This is like bigger Delver deck that wants to win against the smaller Delver deck. Because this deck is, I do think, from what I saw, what I heard from people playing and testing, and Canister has done a similar thing that he did with you with Soulstrong, and they were playing Shadow versus 4-color. And from what I reckon, the matchup is close. The matchup is more or less a coin flip against 4-color and Shadow. I do think that the control-ish version of Grixis is squarely favored against Shadow. You are trading your equity against a bunch of stuff to be better against Shadow and Hammer. Like you are basically a less versatile version of 4-color, the Omnath deck, when you are playing this Grixis. Because you are better against Shadow, you are better against Hammer. I think the matchup against...
And worse versus many random decks.
Yeah, you are worse against random decks. I do think that matchup against the 4-color Omnath deck is a coin flip as well.
I could even maybe not argue is like too strong word. Like I would love to see you playing Grixis Control versus Canister playing 4-color. And
we do that every week, basically.
Yeah, that's true. But like I would like to see it on Twitch and like 5 matches, best of 3, just to see like how the matchup looks, because like I see so many options for the deck. Like their mana curve is too high. Like so, I assume if they resolve Omnath and keep it alive, you basically lose. Even if they resolve
pretty often, yes, I would say.
And you kill it, like they still got the card advantage. They still have Yorion, and you don't have that many ways to punish them for their higher curve because you don't have any form to pressure them. And like 3 Ragavans to dash, in my opinion, is not the way to pressure. Like you are not attacking, and you keep your counters, but eventually you can still run out of cards because they are drawing as many cards as you. So I don't
well,
see...
that's not entirely true. The thing is that the way it goes, it's or how you can win and how you usually win the matchup is that you have better tools to make their 2-for-1s into 1-for-1s, because if you use discard or counter magic and you have more discard and more counter magic than they have, on their 2-for-1s, they become 1-for-1s. And they don't have as many ways to stop your 2-for-1s as you have them, because they have less counter magic and they don't have discard. So your call against command on Snapcaster Mage is a 2-for-1. Or even 3-for-1, because Snapcaster Mage will also be a 2-for-1. And you just slowly accrue value, and at some point you find yourself being 5 cards up, just because your 2-for-1s are more effective. And their deck is 80 cards as well, so it's more often for you to get an iteration advantage, because you will draw more iterations on average. So it's basically, for the first couple turns in the early mid game, you just have to stop them from sticking a permanent way to generate card advantage. Rensky is actually not that bad once you add like endings to your deck and you already have hits. But you basically have to stop them from establishing Teferi or Omnath and just slowly grind their cards away. And at some point you take Lurrus to your hand and start bubbling. And, well, you will win if the game goes like that. But sometimes they will just stick Teferi and you will lose. That's how it is.
That's for me the biggest problem. One, the plan looks quite clear and it looks like it's the powerful, it should work. But when you are still at the very mercy of your own top decks. If something goes wrong, for example, opponent plays on the play Teferi, you don't have an answer, then it can get out of control really fast.
Yes, that's true.
And that's
so what?
the thing. That's the thing that at least I should be very worried if I would play this type of deck, because
but that's how Magic is.
You can't just maybe not let go with the control approach. You need to have right answers at right time all the time, because for example, Inquisition early is super good, but Inquisition drone later in the good, this can be just this one blank that will separate you.
And that's where you're wrong, because Inquisition drone later on is usually good as well, because you have to resolve Lurrus and you have to take their counter spell or their removal spell. So this card with Lurrus and with companions in general became much better later on. And in general, the only thing that matters is the percentages of the games in which everything goes right on average and the games when it doesn't. Because I do think that if you frame it this way, so everything has to go well for you to win. That's not really true. You just have to stabilize early on. I had some games against Yorion when they were 4 cards up, and 5 turns later I was the one that was up on card. I do think that it's a close matchup, and I do think on average you will win around 50% of your matches. So Kenzan is definitely somewhat troublesome, and if they get to rebuy that with Ren, then it's not that great. But also they are playing one Kenzan in 80 cards, so it's not that easy to get. But yeah, the matchup is close, and definitely where Grixis, control or whatever you want to call it, loses percentages is against some random stuff. You are worse against Amulet. You are worse against Tron. You are worse against, I guess, Belcher. You are probably better against Bern, because you have Chaos Guiles in your deck if you are playing my newest version. And even if you don't have Chaos Guiles, you have Cling to Dust and you have Fast Lands and you don't play 4 Thoughtseize. So I think you are still better against Bern than Shadow, even with 4 color. But you are still worse against I don't know, Dredge. You are still worse against a bunch of random decks. But you are better against the most popular decks, I think.
Yeah, I'm curious how your matchup versus Jan's Saga, for example, looks like. Like it's a battle iteration versus Urza's Saga. It looks like it, like because like
It's more
other cards
about
should even
iteration
up.
versus Rensky. You can't go let Rensky go too out of control. But you have... Right now I'm playing two main deck answers to Saga tokens. I have one Dresden and one EE. So it's fairly common for you to draw one of them by like turn 5 or 6, especially with like iterations and cantrips. So yeah, I think I feel basically if my opponent is playing Thoughtseize and they are not playing their own iterations, I feel favorite.
Okay, how about like you already talk about it earlier. Do you think that your matchup with Hammer with chip around is like changed?
It's more or less the same.
For example, compared to, for example, Black-White Hammer with Thoughtseize.
It's more or less the same. The most threatening card is still Sentino, and if they draw multiple Sentinos early on, it's problematic. I've started playing Grim Lavamancer in my sideboard.
I saw it.
Because it's good against Sentino. It's also good against like random decks. Against, I don't know, you get paired against, I don't know, Merfolk or some other shitty deck, or against Affinity. Or against, like, I've played against Glimpse recently, and Lavamancer was good there as well.
Killing Kalni Garden tokens?
Killing like Pyromancer tokens or Kalni Garden tokens or Wave Sifters or whatever. Like, in general, a pretty solid card against small creatures still. So yeah, basically to sum up, I think that Grixis is still when it is. Good cards are good for a reason. And I think this deck is still good. And even though I ran kind of cold recently, I won't blame it on a deck. I will blame it on me making mistakes because I haven't played very well recently. And also I got some bad variants. But in general, I do think that compared to Shadow, you are trading a bit of like well-roundedness in your matchup for being better in those popular matchups, which I think is something that, like, to go to the Legacy parallel one last time, that's something you really want. You just do it like this in Legacy, because Legacy is much more condensed around those top decks than Modern is. In Modern, it's not that easy, because you will still play against those random decks, let's call them, about the same amount of time as against those top decks. So that's why, or even more than that. So that's why people are playing Shadow, I think, because Shadow is the more well-rounded deck, and it's like
punish easier.
It punishes easier. So basically, I do think that Grixis is the control deck is a pretty feast or famine deck. Like, you either go into the winner's bracket with a like 3-0 score, and you get paired against more Shadows and more Hammers, and you have higher probability of top 8ing than the Shadow player because your matchups are better then. But you also have higher probability to just get paired against 2 random decks and go 0-2. So it's basically, I do think that those decks are very similar in power level in general, and I think on average you will get more 0-2s, but also slightly more top 8s with Grixis deck, with control deck, and you will get more like strong. I guess these days only top 8s really matter, but back in the day, like, Grixis is the type of deck that will get you more often to top 8 of the GP, or just bomb out on day 1. And Grixis of Shadow is the type of deck that will just get you this 11-4 almost every single time, and you will just get those like 2 pro points and $200 or whatever you got for 11-4 those days. And it's much more stable decks. And of course you will top 8 with it as well, because it's a great deck. And I'm basically just making my win-loss distribution more sharp. I think I'd rather, if I play 2 events, I'd rather top 8 one and 0-2 another one than top 16 both. And that's like some people will just feel better when they get this like decent result, right? Like there is nothing wrong in thinking that your 65-70% win rate event is good because it's an okay event. If you go 6-3, that's like a respectable score. Nobody will laugh at you for going 6-3. And honestly, nobody should laugh at you for going 0-2 because laughing at people for having poor results is like really bad taste. And
unless you are playing Merfolk, of course.
Unless you are playing Merfolk or unless you are good friends with that person, then you can laugh at them.
And it's the best moment when you can like merge.
Yes, and if your friend is playing Merfolk and you can laugh at them, it's like
all the time.
so good. But yeah.
Okay, about my grade, I kind of believe that maybe you're right in some things. I still don't like the lack of like closing the game quickly, and like I personally I wouldn't feel good with the deck that needs to really fight for every single win. It's not that easy. You don't have these free win effects. You don't have like this very like extremely powerful.
especially except for Hammer matchup. Because against Hammer you just have Lurrus and Explosives or Lurrus Dress Down, and that's your I win button. But that's true. In most matchup, you have to just squeeze out your victories by attacking each turn for 2. And one of the worst feelings in the world is if you're playing against 4 color and you are winning, but they manage to get some Omnath life gain trigger going and they have like 35 life and you just have to attack with your 2 Snapcaster mages like 10 times. And
then every Vren is like, please don't play Vren because I will lose all of my
it happens much often, not against 4 color, but against Tron when they attack with Wurmcoil like 2 or 3 times, and then you have to just gradually beat them down from like 35 life or whatever. So yeah. Okay, it's not for everybody.
For me it's B, but mostly because like I'm not a very big fan of the decks that can't kill end the game quickly.
Yeah, and there is no misconception. I don't think this deck is like better choice than Death Shadow, and I don't want to go around saying that. Okay, so play my deck that's not winning any events is better than Death Shadow that's consistently top-8, because that's bullshit. And I like my credibility and I want to have my credibility, and I don't want to say to people stuff like that because it's obviously not true. But what I will say and what I believe to be true is that I think this deck is very similar in power level to Death Shadow. And if you enjoy playing that, if you, like me, are a Snapcaster Mage simp,
don't like winning and like to just keep playing Magic until you...
No, I do think you are winning similar amount of games as you would win with Death Shadow. But if you are a Snapcaster Mage simp, as I am, I think that's the best choice you can make in the format.
Yeah, the best Snapcaster deck, that's for sure.
Tak. And that's all I ever wanted from Magic, to play the best Snapcaster deck there is.
Okay, that's reasonable, I would say.
Okay, moving on to... Yeah. Oh? Did you say the same thing as I do?
Yeah, I said moving on.
Okay, so let's go to our next deck. We won't argue over this one at all because it's Hammer. And Hammer goes into S tier for both of us. There is no dispute. Hammer was or has been, is, and probably will be a top tier deck for a very long time.
Yeah,
it's just a great deck. You can grind, and now with Reality Chip, you can either just go Flying Seba very early, which is an Ink of Nexus skill. It's the moniker that Polish Magic players came up with from a known video on Polish YouTube called Latający Seba. And
it's really funny.
Flying Seba is basically, or Flying Sebastian, I guess, for English speaking people. It's when you go turn 1 White Source Sigardas 8, turn 2 Inkmoth Nexus Stoneforge Mystic, find Hammer, and turn 3 animate Inkmoth, kill them with Hammer. That's what Flying Seba means. You can go that. You can go turn 1 8 Mem Knight, turn 2 to hammer skill your opponent. You can also fetch for reality chip and bury them in card advantage or with Saga. The deck is super well rounded. It has many angles of attack, and it very rarely loses to itself.
Yeah,
It doesn't have the old affinity problem when you kill your plating or Ravager and you are just left with like a bunch of opals and Springleaf Drum and Signal Pest and Vault Scourges. Your cards are just good. So
most of them are good.
Yeah.
Like Ornithopter is not.
yeah,
the,
but you
the
have
most
you just have like 4 to 8 bad cards when
yeah,
or something like that,
20,
and they've had like 20 in Affinity. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
quick question. Do you think that blue-white hammer is the way to go and is playing other versions a mistake? Other versions means most likely black-white, yeah? With 4-6.
I think that you want to play reality chip. I can see playing Esper. I can see playing like basically black white with one hallowed fountain, and you play reality chip because I think you want to play more fetch lands with chip because you can scry with chip basically with fetch land, and you can get rebuys on playing cards from top of your deck. And if you play like 7 fetch lands, but I think is perfectly fine with those versions. You have one fountain, which is like 8 sources from lands. You have 4 Springleaf Drums. You also have Mystics, so you can put it into play with Mystic and attach it for free with Pure Steel or Sigarda's Aid. So you don't. If chip is your only blue card, I think you can go away with a small amount of blue sources.
Like 11 of them should be enough.
Yeah, with Springleaf Drums like 11. I think that's fine. But I can also see just blue-white, straight blue-white with Spell Pierce and Lavinia being better than...
I
think Spell Pierce is better than Thoughtseize in this deck, honestly.
Yeah, like Spell Pierce is like so good. Like I also wanted to say about this combat trick,
Blacksmith's Kill.
Yeah, something like this. Like,
it's really good.
It's really good. Like playing like protection spell in Hammer, it gives you so much. Like this, like all you need very often is this one combat going well, or one equip with reality chip going well, and after that you should be really good. That's why I feel that the card is very underplayed in Hammer, and I
think you should play one in every single Hammer list.
Yeah, and I think that playing 2 or 3 can be an overkill, but like in my opinion, playing in the main deck 2 copies should be like
I would play at least one, and I think it's also some people are just overlooking that it can target any permanent, and it gives hexproof. And if you're playing Erza Saga and your opponent goes turn 2 Spreading Seas, you can say fuck off. I will give my Erza Saga hexproof, and your Spreading Seas won't get my Saga. And also get indestructibility, so your explosives won't do jack shit, or your Wrath of God or Supreme Verdict. Like this card just helps you in so many different situations. It's
even a pump sometimes.
Yeah, it's a pump if you target a more or less any creature in your deck. I guess not Paladin and nor Mystic.
Yeah,
but like
that's it.
3/4 or something like that, right?
Okay.
But yeah,
about like Spell Pierce. Spell Pierce is rude because I'm playing Cascade deck right now, and like countering my Wrath of God, not cool. Don't do this.
Also, Lavinia is rude against
Lavinia is such a powerful card. Like obviously against Cascade decks, like by definition, it's really good. But I also saw Lavinia versus other decks, and it was like a really cool way to stop problematic things. For example, Force of Vigor. That was a problem early on, like because if Force of Vigor stopped early kills, and with Lavinia around, it's much harder to set up this like line of defense. So it's very good. Like the only thing I would like to point out is that so far Lion Sash is kinda bad, and
Much worse than I thought it would be.
It's more like a tutorable creature with Stoneforge Mystic. Like there's no time to use this ability at all. Like when you're playing Hammer, you nearly always have something to do with your mana because you have Urza Saga, you have Lurrus, you have Stoneforge Mystic into something, you have Reality Chip reconfigure
Or
now.
Flying Seba.
Or Flying Seba, whatever. Just
Not whatever. Flying Seba is important.
okay, so sure. Lion Sash isn't the best, and I expect it to not be played in like 2 weeks from now. It's like as a Gravehate is just too bad. As a creature is just too bad. As a tutorable artifact equipment creature, maybe it's okay, but it's probably then not enough, and it's probably still worse than Reality Chip.
I think also the downfall of Sash was kinda Urza Saga because there is much less incentive to get a tutorable Gravehate under Stoneforge Mystic when you can have a tutorable Gravehate under Urza Saga, which is like cheaper and more efficient.
That's true, but it's also interesting. But I see more and more lists not playing any Gravehate card under Urza Saga at all.
In 75 or in the main deck?
In 75, I saw the list with 0 Gravehate actions. Sometimes
I don't like that.
They're playing but like one, and like playing one is perfectly fine. But like imagine when you can play.
I would play one. I think
I
one
would
is fine.
also play one. That's for sure. But that was also like very interesting for me that like they decide to cut it. Like for me, cutting needle is easier than cutting a Gravehate card.
Okay. So I guess one final thing I want to say about Hammer is that I would try to abuse cheap as much as possible. I would try to play more than one. I would play like, I don't know, 2 in the main deck. I would also try to build my deck in a way that facilitates cheap better. So you play more fetch land. You might want to play more $0. Like maybe you want to play Paradise Mantle because it's something you can tutor and gives you mana, and you want a lot of mana when you have cheap. I would try to make cheap work as hard as I could, and then if it's not good enough or not worth it, I would just dial back into more standard way of building decks. But I do think that cheap is a potentially really powerful card that you want to try to abuse. And once again, if it doesn't work out, you can just go back to where things were before, which is 100% fine. Okay, let's move on to our next deck, which is, well, I have it labeled here as Giant Saga, but it's just Giant Lurrus decks in general. Because recently, to much of my joy, people have been trying a different Giant colored deck with Lurrus than Saga. Okay, you are still playing Saga and you're still playing Ren, but you are not playing the Giant Saga deck that was popular a bunch of time ago. Because I think that if you take the important part of the deck, which is like you are playing X lands plus Urza Saga, let's say, I don't know, 23, you are playing a small Urza Saga package, you are playing Renski and Ragavan. So in total it's like 35 cards, let's say. You don't need your last 25 cards to be generically good stuff giant cards, like Tarmogoyf, like, I don't know, discard spells in the main deck, or like Darcy or whatever. You can go towards other directions. You can go towards like land routes. When you play... we kind of saw that with Reclaimer instead of Darcy a few weeks ago. And now we can go even further with like Boseju and Sokenzan, and you can play more of a lands deck. Maybe you even want to play like one Life from the Loam to have like 5th Ren. I don't know. But you can go into this more like defined direction, or you can go towards something like the food deck that Kenji Tsumura top-8'd the showcase with this week. So you can focus more on like Cut Oven, because you can find Witch's Oven with Urza Saga. It
That's
produces
Trail of Cramps, yeah.
With your Trail of Cramps. Trail of Cramps is a really good grindy card, and you can just get a bit of material, a bunch of material. Like all of those cards produce a lot of material. which later can be used for doing arbitrary game actions or just for pumping your saga tokens, and they will just kill your opponent, because I think your saga tokens in this deck will be significantly bigger than saga tokens in other Jant versions. So
That's true.
in general, I like the invention or the innovation here. I will still put Jant into B tier for now, but with this small asterisk that Sodek has been using, I would give it a B plus, because I'm hopeful for people to innovate more and to try to tune like the Jant's food decks and other ideas as to how to use this core of Jant of like Ren and Lurrus and Erza Saga. Maybe you can go into Naya if you'd rather splash for white cards or black cards. I don't really care. But yeah, I would like to try to see this deck just pushing forward. Maybe only called Anvil that I mentioned before in our introduction is a card that you can see playing in this deck. In general, I'm hopeful, but for now, I'm a bit reserved as well. So, what do you think about Jant?
I'm a bigger believer, and I'm already putting this in A, because like the core of the Jant saga is already good, and it's proven, and it's like working. And this new approach, especially with Ravenous Squirrel being a better Tarmogoyf, because like it grows really fast in the deck, because only 1 mana instead of 2, is something that's interesting for me. And like I wanted this food decks to be good, and it looks like it can be something, and I really want it to be, because like right after Paprika, should maybe focus a bit more on this approach and try it out. Let's see if it's good enough or not. And I believe it can be. So A for now, but like A minus, just because like I'm a believer.
All right. We will jump straight into our next deck, which is Living. And okay, Sodek, you have been playing a bunch of Living and recently Living and put 2 copies into the top 8 of the showcase last weekend. Tell us, what do you think about Living End and why it is good or medium or whatever you think about it right now?
Okay. Living End usually does not get any new cards. It's really hard for this type of deck to get this one. And Living End got 2 good ones. The first one is Otawara. I started playing as a 1 copy, then Link Hussar like ended in the final of the showcase.
I think top 4.
I'm pretty sure it was final, whatever. Like in top 8 of the showcase, he played 2. And I
think the finals were GDS versus Hammer, but whatever.
Okay, whatever. Like I was playing 1 copy main deck, 1 copy stable, then I started playing 2 copies main deck, and it's good. Mainly because I also cut Brazen and Borrower, so I wanted to have some form of bounce, and I cut it because like there's another card that's like I wasn't believing in it, but like turned out to be really good. It's a Colossal Sky Turtle, like latający jędrek. Well done.
Latający Seba w innym wydaniu.
And like by itself, like if you combine like every one ability, it doesn't look really good, because like 2 mana bounce only a creature instead of a permanent is a like big downgrade. 3 mana regrowth is like an expensive effect, and it's not really good. But if you combine them both with like 6/5 flying creature with ward even, it's starting to be like something. And like I had games with Brazen Borrower when I was forced to bounce something because of the tempo approach, like versus Hammer you have to bounce a creature, then you need to Living End, but you have only 1 cycler because your Brazen Borrower is in the adventure zone instead of the graveyard. And I believe it's a like straight upgrade. I also believe that like Living Ends results were strongly dictated by the fact that people kind of forgot that Cascade decks exist. Like I didn't see any Fluster stores around, for example, and
Yeah, but on the flip side, people have been playing Lavinia and Spellpierce Hammer instead of Otsis.
yeah, but I don't believe that they were playing Lavinia mostly because Living End was around.
No, I
Like
think they are
like
playing Lavinia because of Cascade. Like, what's the other reason?
Force of Vigor?
I think it's still mostly Cascade.
Maybe.
I think you can play much better cards against Force of Vigor specifically if you want to target that.
Okay, I won't argue with you. Still, like the Hammer matchup with the like blue-white version got a bit worse. It's still good for me, and I believe like I would like to play it because like I'm forcing them to have responses, not the other way, and I have like a lot of interactive cards to deal with it. Still, like the matchup versus like 4 color, like all the fairy decks is still kind of strange because it should be really good unless they have the fairy, and with Otawara you have more responses because you have Fawn, you have Grief, and you have two Otawaras to deal with it. So it's easier right now to do things with it. And I believe it like right now the deck is really well positioned, plus it's really good. Like also the matchup versus Grixis Shadow is kinda like I would say 50-50. Because like game one they have like form of discard and drawn, but you also have your phones and griefs, and you need to top deck only one card to win. And because they have like low amount of life quite often, it's very easy to end the game with like not the biggest amount of cyclers. So that's easy. Post time lot is a bit more tricky, but then you have like 4 ley lines and like you can protect from that. And that's just hope they won't have very fast clock plus 1 or 2 counters. Like one you can usually beat the first one, but if they have clock plus 2 counters, it's really hard to do anything. Still, I believe that it's really good right now. I also think that it will be worse in like 3 weeks from now because like people will wake up and play random chase or random fluster storm from time to time. It will make Living End and Rhinos to some extent a bit worse. But uh, it's a good deck for now, and it's an A for me right now.
It's an A for Sodek. And what more can I say? It's an A for me as well. I have been a believer in Living End in general. I do think that this deck is really strong on like fundamental level. And whenever you can get excited about it, I will be. So new printings, being well positioned, something like this. I don't need many reasons to put it higher up. Let's skip the deck that we'll just put in C in Merfolk. We all know about that. And go to another deck that we both will put in C, which is Mill. And Mill is not great, but it still gets some results from time to time. So that's why we have it here. Get a top 16 on a challenge, or what, top 32, or sometimes top 8 as well. So it's still showing up, and that justifies its inclusion in this ranking, but it does not justify any more than that, and it's just C for both of us. Anything you want to add, Sodek?
I think like the most important thing is like I think that if there were not Eldrazi's or like these shuffle effects around, I think Mill would be like much better positioned. But right now,
It would be.
like
I don't
the
know.
biggest like problem with the deck is that like everyone, at least when I was like looking at the deck list at the showcase, there were a lot of one Eldrazi in the sideboard. Like people were prepared for Mill, and that's why Mill didn't get any.
No, I think
results.
your biggest problem as a Mill person is that
you are playing Mill. Yeah,
you can't really beat Ragavan with Disruption.
like
That's
you
my experience.
you can have a lot of you have a lot of removal. Like post sideboard, they have like 8 removal copies, and
But then you are cutting on your mill cards because you have to
yeah,
cut
that's
something.
like
So
that's obviously the problem. But
I
even
think that the shadow
Ancestral
matchup is not
like,
great. Basically, what I'm saying.
like it's I believe it's kind of an uphill battle, but you have Tasha's Hideous Laughter, which is extremely powerful.
Yeah, but
versus
they
them.
have counter spells on this card, and that's
Yeah, like,
one
that's
of the
true.
few cards they really have to be careful about.
Yeah. Overall, I feel that like Mill needs to wait till its times.
Okay, moving forward, we do have Prowess, and by Prowess we mean basically all versions of Prowess that have been popping up from time to time, and I don't have anything to say about it, really, to be honest.
Okay, so I will say about it. The Reckless Impulse addition gave the deck some like fresh air, and I saw versions playing mono red with just like double stage Reckless Impulse. I saw people still playing blue red with Explosive Iteration. I saw people playing red white too, and mm, it's fine. But on the other hand, like this very same spot for the aggressive deck with some form of interactive spells is occupied by like both Hammer and Shadow, and they both look better. And that's why I don't see many reasons to play Prowess outside if you own the deck and like it. I believe that like Lava Dart looks good in a matchup because there's an Esper Sentinel or Ragavan, but like outside these two cards, there aren't many good targets for the card. And even if you, for example, kill Esper Sentinel, it's still 1 for 1. They will draw a card, and this flashback maybe will do something later on, maybe it won't. So
It can kill
I'm
Flying
not.
Seba.
You can, that's true. But on the other hand, like there are enough X2 creatures in the
That's
hammer
true.
to like think that Lava Dart can stop you at all. Overall, I feel it's just a worse version of like current best tempo decks. That's why it's in C, but it's a C plus because I can see a potential of like card advantage engine with light up and reckless impulse.
Yeah, so for me it's a, I guess, B minus, let's say. Like it's in the B tier, it could be in C, but I do think that it got some things going for it. Like Reckless Impulse that Sodek mentioned is a pretty strong card. You can still play. I saw some people playing like Jeskai versions, basically red white splash for iteration. That's also a possibility. You get both Canopy lands, which is also kind of cool in Jeskai. Both good Canopy lands that were red based. And yeah, just an okayish deck in similar boat like Burn for me, which is like it can exploit some matchups, it can exploit some situations, and it's just a tad bit underpowered in my opinion to compared to just basically what Sodek says compared to like Shadow or Hammer. Okay, so done with Prowess. Next up, we are missing our monthly, or I guess bi-monthly in this situation, disparaging of Red Black, because Red Black has had 0 results and people just move towards different decks, and we can just tell you that Red Black is worse than other Lurrus decks. And well, that's what I'm saying right now. Don't play Red Black, but we won't give the deck the honor of being in the C tier on our list. So we will just jump right onto Rhinos, which is our next deck on the list. Cascade decks have been kinda back, but mostly Living and Rhinos have been kinda not left completely forgotten, because there are some Rhinos players still making waves, but For now I would say that Living End is solidly the most popular and probably the best positioned Cascade deck.
Yeah, that's for sure. Rhinos has the problem with what you it reminds me a bit of Grixis versus Grixis Shadow. Living End can more often lose to random stuff because random stuff usually plays a lot of Grave Hit, for example, and it's harder post sideboard with Living End to catch up. But Rhinos has reasonably good matchups versus everything that's in tier B and lower. But it struggles against top tier decks.
Yeah.
The matchup versus Hammer, poor. The matchup versus Grixis Shadow, poor. The matchup versus Four Color, you can win, but if it's
close
not
to
that
poor, I would
comfortable
say.
for-
I would say
yeah.
somewhere in this vicinity. It's better than Shadow and Hammer, but it doesn't mean much.
Yeah,
Really.
the matchup versus other good decks like Living End, poor. Amulet, well, that's a tricky one, but I still think it's a
See what I
poor matchup.
what I found. We were talking about field decks, and
OMG.
that's Kenji.
Hello, Kenji. Nice to see you.
Hello, Sodek. I'm Kenji.
Hello.
I got this
and-
in my latest card market order
Nice.
as a bonus from my favorite Austrian store, Dragon Reiki Games, hashtag not sponsored. Very, very nice people over there. A lot of Japanese cards. If you like Japanese cards like I do,
What?
you can get those nice Kenjis as well.
Okay, sadly I have to buy black bordered City of Brass. I hope I will never have to buy them. Please don't.
So when we are on the topic of Japanese cards, it's kind of ironic because I have 74 out of 75 cards in my deck in Japanese now. And the only one I'm missing is from the Japanese theme set because I don't have Japanese Otawara yet. And that's very sad.
Problems.
Yeah, problems.
Okay, Rhinos still fine in League or something when you're if you're going for FNM or when there's much higher chances that you can play against very mixed metagame, but in the winners metagame, I don't see Rhinos being really well positioned. That's why I have it in B. And in my opinion, it will be really hard to put Rhinos lower because how okay they are versus random decks.
Once again, it's a fundamentalist sound deck on base level, so very, very hard to put Rhinos in C, almost impossible, I would say.
Yeah,
just like you will never put Hammer in C or Shadow or Four Color. Those are just fundamentally strong decks, and
playing good decks has some advantages. The biggest one is that your deck is always playable.
So, final verdict?
B.
2 Bs. To be honest. To be honest. Nice. Okay. Nothing more to add. If you want to play Cascade, play Living End, but Rhinos are not embarrassingly bad or anything like that.
At least for now, because if we see a lot of grave hit uptick, for example, more endurances, then Living End may be once again badly positioned. But so
also,
far,
I think it's better against hate Chalice of the Void because you can play both Otawara and Boseju in that deck, and you can't really play Boseju in Living End.
Yeah, I think we forgot that Rhinos was one of the biggest beneficiaries,
I think, but
beneficiaries of legendary lands because it can play anything because the mana requirements are not that strict as in Living End because Living End cycles for blue a lot.
Yeah, you very rarely need double. You don't really have double costs.
Yeah, and I saw for example the lines when Rhinos players were not playing many. For example, were not playing Blood Moon because Boseju was doing the same thing, but they were playing plus 2 lands, considering free Boseju to Otawara main deck.
Yeah, 25 to 26 lands, something like that.
Yeah, and they're pretty cool, to be honest.
Yep. Okay, moving on to the deck that definitely won't benefit from Boseju, which is Karn, or Tron rather. The deck is not called Karn.
Wkurwiony golem, bym powiedział.
Wkurwiony golem. Yeah. He has a Seba vibe, but he's more like pissed Seba vibe, not
Yeah,
flying
that's
Seba.
true.
It would be very hard for Karn to fly, I think.
Yeah, and please don't because of the Pyrex and oil splitting.
If you think that chemtrails are bad, Phyrexian
And-
trails would be much
Much
worse.
worse.
So basically, has anything really changed other than Boseju with Tron? Like, we've been saying that Tron is bad for months, and now it's even worse because okay, it can play Boseju,
It can play Boseju, so it's.
but I think
it's
like unlike Amulet, I think Boseju is better against Tron than in Tron. I think that Boseju is
Yeah,
net
that's
positive
for
for
sure.
Amulet and net negative for Tron. So
Yeah, that's true.
that's all I need basically to put it in C tier and don't really think about it more because it just got a bit worse than
I
it was
also
before.
have it in C, but like we saw like some good finishes from like top 6. I think we saw on top 8 like in the last month. So Tron is kind of around. Tron like Tron players will probably keep playing Tron because they have the deck and etc. But like the times when you go over the top of everyone are gone because four color can get over the top of you, which is like strange. Like tempo decks are even better because they have Ragavan. So like the worst feeling probably is when Ragavan attacks like 4 or 5 times and then suddenly they steal your card and cast it before you can play your own card.
Yeah, the best I've done against Tron is Ugin, I think. I've cast their
Nice.
Ugin, but also one of the most backbreaking scenarios is when you play against Ragavan and they just steal your Karn Great Creator on turn 3, and they play turn 3 Karn Great Creator and your artifacts that don't work, and it's really hard to play the game after your opponent plays Karn out of their like Grixis deck on turn 3.
Yeah, what do you think about the Karn with like 3 gunshots main, 2 ballistas? Just make sure that you don't lose to Ragavan and focus on and use your regular game plan versus everything else.
I don't know. Gutshot is not ideal against Hammer, for example, as well. Just like Lava Dart is not.
That's true.
So.
That's true. Hard.
Yeah, I would be more I would be more about playing like a lot of dismembers or maybe Warping Whale, but probably Dismember if I was to just play a bunch of removal spell.
Yeah. And like when you are talking about Green Tron, like Tron in general, like every other option to play Tron, like Eldrazi Tron or even Blue Tron, whatever, is like even worse in terms of playing around Boseju. So like I just wouldn't recommend playing Tron ever. And now it's even worse than this.
It's even worse, exactly. So we can just move to our next deck, which is
I think you miss one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is Murktide. And Murktide, Sodek is cosplaying the Regente.
Kinda hard.
Murktide is one of those decks that will never be really lower than A, I guess.
I can think about times when Murktide can be B, but it's
maybe
really strange.
But
really
that's
strange,
like really hard, really specific like situation. Like Murktide is an A tier deck for me.
It's for me too, so I can click it too. But...
Yeah, it's just a solid choice.
Yeah, like,
it benefits from Otawara.
Yeah, I wanted to say about the changes in the deck. Like, there are like 2 approaches of playing the Murktide. Like some of them are still playing Blood Moon, saying that it's good. Like the other group of players are saying that Blood Moon is extremely poor, and they are not playing it at all. And I
like not playing Blood Moon with Boseju in the format.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of these things. Like the only thing that has changed over like 2 months was playing Fury. There's something that was kind of obvious if you are playing red cards, but wasn't played at all. But like probably again, Aspiring Spike played it, and like suddenly people started playing one copy. I didn't see it earlier, at, at least. And like there are still differences between playing Archmage's Charm or not playing
Yeah,
Archmage's
playing
Charm.
Archmage's Charm with Blood Moon was also like super weird to me always.
Super weird.
Like
Yeah,
I think my take on playing Blood Moon and Murktide is that I would play Magus in the sideboard and just have it for Amulet and well Tron if you see it, but don't board Blood Moons or Magus against like Grixis or 4-color when you have Archmage's Charms in your deck. Like just don't do that.
if you have charms, if you don't have it, maybe on the play.
Well, if you don't have it, it's a bit different. But
Yeah.
if you have them,
Still, like,
and I think you want
also,
charms. Like you want charms in the Death Shadow Hammer metagame.
yeah, I think like the charm is also a fine way to at least stand the bleeding versus Urta's Saga. That like
Yes.
Murktide, like dress down in Murktide is not as good as in Shadow, so it's not like played in the main deck heavily, etc. You can still play it because it's a good response to as a Saga.
Or you can play Explosions
like-
in the main deck, like people have been doing in Murktide.
That's also
like
a
one
reasonable
copy
thing.
is pretty common, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Still, really solid deck. And like Pigonti, right now the current trophy leader, is playing it a lot. And yeah, like playing good cards turns out to be good.
Okay. Now, an event that everybody has been waiting for. Sodek's favorite deck of all time. We had to make a special category named Z specifically for Sodek's for Sodek because he was so adamant that this is the best deck that has ever been created. And that's obviously Blue-White Control.
Boo!
Sodek, why do you love this deck so much?
I love this deck because like not winning is the essential part of Magic. Imagine a situation when you can play anything that's proactive, but you do otherwise, and you just keep playing counters and counter and counter and counter again and again and again and again until opponents just concede because they can't take it anymore. And like I rage quit quite often versus blue white because like after I got like a fifth counter, it's like OMG, let's not play this again.
What does Sodek likes to say?
Kurwo jebana!
No, you didn't. So you didn't hear it, but I played the clip of you saying "kurwa jebana."
Nice. I just don't like the deck. I feel it's clunky. I feel it's just like unnecessary tries to play too many counters when you can be just more proactive with Omnat. And I will say it's C, although it should be higher, but I don't like the deck. And I want to say special thanks to let me it be worse. Like let me it. Why are you doing this? I won't let you. Okay. I was starting again to think that it's not as pathetic to play blue white control, but after that I saw the blue white list with Think Twices, and I'm like, OMG, why it's happening? Why Think Twice can be ever played in 2022? And I still have no idea why this Think Twice is there, but it's there for some reason, and like I just can't understand. OMG, don't do this. No, at least
They
are
got to me
Japanese
last week.
Yeah, but at least they're like nice, like
Okay,
spiral
so,
version, Japanese.
Now
etc.
after this completely, I don't even know how to describe it. Just completely like, what am I trying to say? not undeserved, let's say. Let's say undeserved. Completely undeserved wave of hate from Sodek. I will say that I think the blue-white is great. That's why it's in the B tier. And even though B tier is obviously not great, I think it's a B plus deck. But because I have some faith in blue-white, because I think much of the Otherworldly Joy is Otherworldly Light. I combined two names. Much of the Otherworldly Light is a pretty cool addition to the deck. Because it's a cheap answer for Saga that can also double as an answer for like Ragavan, which is cool. You can play less spreading seas in the main deck and more cards that can actually do anything else than killing Saga. It's also an instant that plays well with your other instants. And maybe at some point we will see blue-white adopting Snapcasters once again, if you play much of the Otherworldly Light, because then you have like 8 counter spells, you have March, you have Prismatic Ending, you have Verdict. Suddenly you have a bunch of good cards you can flashback. Because when MH2 got released, blue-white just moved squarely into like a prison-ish deck category with like a lot of Chariots of the Void, sometimes even main deck Rest in Peace, stuff like that. And now you can maybe go back towards a more like well-rounded deck. Maybe you want to play like a sideboard Snapcaster Mage. I don't think that's out of the question. And I think
okay. Do you want like some news from the blue-white control world? Like usually we're right now playing only one Chalice of the Void main deck. Only one sideboard. Remember the times when people were playing like 3 copies of Chalice?
I remember.
That was wild. Right now, like okay, I still see 3 Think Twice and I want to shut it down. SAP.
Think Twice is life and it's the truth, and you should play Think Twice in your deck.
Never.
I wanted to play Think Twice in Grixis recently. And
still blue-white control is a deck with Otawara because they can play it. And like now other things haven't changed. It would be quite interesting to see if Snapcaster is really good. Also, it would be a nice target to use your Teferi minus because compared to for color when there's abundant growth to bounce, blue-white does not have that many good options. Like you can bounce Spreading Seas, but like it's worse. Because,
question.
Like,
if you cast Think Twice and you flashback it, how many times did you think?
Think twice and then think twice. So 4 times, I guess.
I think 3. That's my answer. That's always been my answer, and my friends never really understand why, because I think that you are thinking, and then you are thinking again when you cast Think Twice, and then you are thinking for the 3rd time when you flashback it. But it also depends. If you EOT, you play Think Twice and flashback Think Twice, you are thinking 3 times. But if you play Think Twice, you are thinking 2 times, and if you flashback it next turn, you thought about it and then you think twice. So it's 3 or 4, depends.
Let's move on.
Okay, the last deck on our list.
Too much.
Sodek is a uncultured barbarian who doesn't understand the required amount of IQ for enjoying Rick and Morty and casting Think Twice.
Clearly not enough.
Okay, in general, I would just say that blue-white control players are the most cringe group of people ever involved in Magic, in my opinion. In general, like your archetypical blue-white player who's like, "Oh, you're playing Burn, that doesn't require any skill, and I'm playing super skill-intensive counter Magic into Sweeper into Planeswalker." Those are super cringe people, and I do not think that there is a required amount of IQ that's higher for like control decks than Burn decks or whatever else. But I do like making fun of Sodek and blue-white players. Cool. So last deck.
Maybe I'm a blue-white player.
Last and maybe not least, because they've been decks like Mill and Creativity on this list, is Yawgmoth. Deck that Sodek once loved and praised it super highly. What can you say about Yawgmoth now, Sodek? Huh?
Yawgmoth has some problems. But these problems is removal and the other decks being optimized even better than before. And I'm not liking the position of the deck because against all like the top three, Grixis Shadow, and for color your matchup is like bad versus Hammer. It's closer to 50-50, but I believe that Hammer has an advantage here. Like if you are on a play and play very fast Yawgmoth and you can control the board with -1 counters, sure you can win. But I don't see why this deck could be really good. Also, I'm not a very big fan of like Yawmoth's most popular sideboard plan for okay, Grist is a really good card, and I have to say that Grist is like the one card that helps
Saves
the deck really
Yawgmoth.
much. Yeah, that saves it, and that maybe I'm considering putting higher than it is. But my
Where
opinion
it
was
is?
enough.
Where it is, Sodek? Tell us
It's
now.
in C right now, in my opinion.
No way. Your favorite deck?
It's not my favorite deck, but I still value it highly. But the problem is that I don't believe that Endurance is really well positioned, and I correlate a bit Yawgmoth with like the power level of Yawgmoth with how Endurance is good because they very often play for copies and they can tutor for it, and like quite often they are less about the combo and more about mid-rangey tricky way to draw cards and do things. And like I don't believe that Endurance is that good right now. So that's why in my opinion Yawgmoth is much worse than it used to be. Like for me it's a C plus, but still C right now.
If you're wondering what I'm doing, I'm sinking to the level of Yawgmoth.
Nice.
It's a C deck.
That was really cool.
But it's really uncomfortable to see it that way. So
Okay,
just...
we also had one deck that should be in the list, but Jędrek deleted it in the last time, and I really wanted to mention it.
It's Hardened Scales.
Yeah, it's Hardened Scales. Hardened Scales got some results in the last few weeks, and while I still think it's just a worse Hammer, it's cool that Hardened Scales, after all these like Hammer months, were able to put
It's
in
probably
results.
like a B/C tier deck.
Yeah, I had it in B, but like mostly because it had many results. And I would love this deck to be played a bit more often, but on the other hand, I totally understand why it's not that played because like there are other options.
And especially
better.
now you even get Blue-White Affinity, which is like another competitor for Scales.
Yeah, I personally I feel that Blue-White Affinity is better positioned than Hardened Scales because you can create huge creatures easier because you can just play.
They're more of a good stuff deck and less of the like synergy deck than Scales.
Yeah, and like it's easier to break your synergies with removal, especially with Prismatic Ending around eating your enchantments that used to be like
Untouchable.
safe on the battlefield. Yeah, untouchable. Now
And your Ozoliths and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's why. Well, if you don't want to play Hammer, you want to play an artifact deck, I will go for Affinity. But still, if you are an expert on 100 scales, it's still, in my opinion, a good enough deck to take on the tournament, and you'll gain a lot of percentage points because of people not knowing what's going on. So
Yep.
I think that's one of the few decks that's not very like explored. Maybe not the best. Like people don't know what you're doing, and when they are making mistakes or they're thinking that they are safe, and they tap out in a stupid way, and when they die to Ballista.
And of course, it wouldn't be an episode of our video in general if I didn't mention my favorite podcast, Dominar's Judgment, when they were talking about Hardened Scale recently, because they were talking about SCG Con when Eli Cassis top 8 at one of the tournaments with Scales, and Erilax mentioned something that somebody used to say, that when you're playing scales and you start counting if you have lethal, suddenly you realize that you have like 4 times lethal and they will be at like -50 or whatever. So, yep, this deck can win basically out of nowhere.
Yeah, and I think that if you have enough, it reminds me Doomsday from like Legacy 7 years ago, when everyone said that playing regular, like before Tatos Oracle was printed, like playing regular Storm is better, but like there was this one guy who knows every pile of Doomsday that you can ever create, and like once this one guy shows at the tournament, like they usually had really good results, mostly because they knew the deck inside out. And I believe that Hardened is in a similar position when you can benefit a lot by learning what you can do with your cards.
Okay. That's it, I think.
Yes.
Finito, as
Koniec.
some people say. Koniec. Okay, there you have it. Our tier lists, which are pretty similar this week, or this month, or these 2 months even. Basically, if you play anything from SRA, it will be good. If you play most B tier decks, it's fine as well. If you play C tier decks, well, at least you are not playing Merfolk, which is okay. But yeah, Modern is still like a format in which you can play like 10 or 15 decks and have a reasonable shot at getting a good score. What did you want to play as a deck?
And there are like many good decks that we are not talking about.
Yeah, because they are just not. They don't have enough like traction in the format, and not enough people are playing it. Like the bridge deck that we've been mentioning many times, the blue-red bridge deck that only like Jiggy Wiggy is playing. I think Tobias top-8'd a challenge with it recently as well. But like,
there's a Crack the Earth deck that like had like won the challenge and had another copy in top-8.
Oh, and there is the Obos deck
that's something that
you mentioned as well.
Yeah, that's also an Obos. Like as long as you have like an idea and you have a plan versus top tier decks, you should be fine. And there's a lot of decks you can tune or find being successful in the current metagame, as long as you have game plan for at least most of the decks from S and A tier.
And it used to be.
I think that you can ignore one.
Yeah.
But if you have problems with...
I don't like ignoring S tier decks. I think you can ignore A tier deck easily. Like you can just say, okay, I will lose to Amulet, or I will lose to Living End or Murktide, whatever. So what I think is that back in the day, you've had a small amount of really powerful cards that were defining format, and you had to play some of those cards. Like you had to play Tarmogoyf, or you had to play Thoughtseize, or you had to play Ancient Stirrings, or Mox Opal, or Looting, or whatever else. Mm-hmm. And right now, you have so many good cards that you can just move those segments in basically any way you want. And there are so much decks like Crack the Earth, which is like Crack the Earth used to be like this very really shitty red-white prison Ponza deck, and now your Crack the Earth deck is Ragavan Erzas Saga deck. Similarly to Breach, it's a Ragavan Erzas Saga deck.
Like I think it's the best Esper Sentinel deck around, because you attack the mana base so hard that it's really hard.
And you have Monthy, which is also important.
Extremely powerful card.
So
once the opponent goes out from your block, it looks embarrassing.
You have so many building blocks that you can just combine basically any way you want, that you can just play your favorite strategy just bolstered with those very powerful cards. Okay, that's it. This has been our metagame tier list update for February and March of 2022.
Also, you can name it a metagame tier post Kamigawa, which is like a cooler name that 2 months in a row.
We can name it that way, but I will name it February/March because I like consistency.
Let's go.
He's Sodek. Oh, he's Sodek. I'm Jędrek. And we'll see you next week with another video about something super interesting. Like maybe we'll make like a deep dive on blue-white. I think Sodek would be interested in that. We'll see. We'll see. Until then, have a lovely weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.
See ya.